Imagination is everything in the income department, too. But as often as not, your best ideas will come from other people. Other people can make you rich if you listen to them. Other people not only have everything we want as far as income is concerned and will gladly give it to us if we'll earn it, they also have the ideas we need if we'll listen to them. Time and again during my business life, the ideas of others have proved to be of enormous value. One idea given to me many years ago by an acquaintance earned my company several $1 million. Another idea, a suggestion at lunch by another acquaintance, resulted in my daily radio program. Another idea worth millions. Others often see things we can do better than we can. We're often too close to ourselves and tend to take ourselves for granted. I don't mean that we should follow every suggestion made to us, not by any means. But every once in a while, someone can drop a handful of diamonds in our lap. We must still follow through with the idea, put it together, cover it with the necessary investment of time, thought, talent, and money. But without the suggestion, we might never have thought of it ourselves. Personal renewal demands that we maintain an open, free-flowing idea system, and we should be as free with our good ideas for others as we are in examining those passed along to us by friends and acquaintances. One idea can make us rich, so that we can then turn to the things we most want to do, if what we most enjoy is not connected with our work. To accomplish anything, as W. McNeill Dixon writes in his interesting book, The Human Situation, you need an interest, a motive, a center for your thoughts. You need a star to steer by, a course, a creed, an idea, a passionate attachment. Men have followed many guiding lights. They've been inspired by love of fame and love of country. They've pursued power, wealth, holiness. They've followed Christ, Muhammad, Napoleon. Something must beckon you or nothing is accomplished. Something about which you ask no questions. Thought needs a fulcrum for its lever. Effort demands an incentive or an aim. We need to know our motive. I know mine, I think. Do you know yours? What makes following our ideas so interesting are the unexpected paths and byways and windfalls that occur along the way, the serendipitous events that unfailingly come to the person in pursuit of a goal. Serendipity means the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. The word was coined by the British author Horace Walpole, who based it on the title of an old fairy tale, The Three Princes of Serendip. The princes in the story were always making interesting discoveries while on a quest for something else. The secret of making serendipitous discoveries is to make certain we're following a star, a cause, a creed, or an idea. It's the secret of what the uninitiated call good luck. Just as ideas and imagination are the fountain of youth, being on a personal quest absolutely guarantees that unexpected good fortune will come our way from time to time. Whenever you hear of someone being lucky, a little investigation will show that the person is a busy, positive kind, looking for new and interesting ways of doing things. I remember reading that good luck is what happens when preparedness meets opportunity. People who pull in their heads and try to play it safe seldom learn about serendipity. Perhaps they wouldn't recognize it if it sat on their doorstep. The next time you hear someone say, "Don't stick your neck out," observe him closely. Chances are he's a rather dull and uninteresting person with little to recommend him. Sticking your neck out is the way to woo serendipity. A friend of mine, Skipper Hill of Miami, named his big trawler yacht Serendipity. A lot of boredom and frustration that's connected with work comes from not knowing more about it. Lurking somewhere within every line of work, there is tremendous opportunity, and if we'd only find a star to steer by, a goal worth working toward, we'll see more of it. One of the greatest explorers who ever lived, Captain James Cook, began as an ordinary seaman. In just 4 years, he had learned enough to become a master of his own ship and to later make the discoveries that made him famous. A happy, successful, serendipitous life began as a common seaman. The people who find a meaning, a deeper purpose in their work, find themselves deluged by good fortune. I suppose that's why just 5% of the people earn 40% of all the money in the country. What is the star by which I steer my life? A good question to ask from time to time. It may change as we mature and sort out the important from the unimportant, but a person without a goal is like a ship without a rudder. I talked to a class of kids in distributive education in Milwaukee not long ago, and afterwards a couple of fine, serious young men came backstage and asked, "But what if we don't have a goal?" And I suggested that they make the finding of a worthy goal their goal. It seemed to help. Another common seaman, Joseph Conrad, studied and worked his way to become a ship's captain. He later spent the long weeks at sea writing his great classic stories. Serendipity. We can put it to work in our lives whenever we wish. All we need is a quest, an odyssey, which is the name of my boat, incidentally. If you'd like to know more about the interesting subject of motivation, what motivates people today and what doesn't, by all means read the book I mentioned earlier, The Enjoyment of Management by John Price. He points out that motivating people has been with us for centuries. The 5 classic forms of motivation were practiced by such legendary greats as Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, and Moses. And for many centuries, these 5 motivators, pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion, worked magnificently. Moses crossed the wilderness, Caesar conquered Gaul, and Cleopatra had her wily way, so naturally these heretofore highly efficient motivators continued into the Industrial Revolution and are still with us today. But do they still motivate? Well, let's see. Pay is income to the person for use as he determines, but he's influenced by a couple of things. Does he have full freedom to use pay in any manner he wants, or must he use all or part of it to fill obligatory demands such as the rent, car payments, the phone bill, and taxes? There isn't as much discretionary income there as some think. Pay in most people's minds is their due for the work they perform. It does not tend to change a person's behavior from median to maximum performance. Pay, then, is not a motivator. It motivates membership, and that's all. Money is what the employer uses to attract and hold people. It motivates them to come or to leave an organization, not to perform to the maximum of their ability. Denial of aspirations for independence of action through detailed direction will certainly motivate changes in organizational behavior. Unfortunately, the motivation will take a negative tack, leading to dissension and withdrawal of individual effort. Discipline, the 3rd classic motivator, still works, but it's much more difficult to apply today. The unions, changes in lifestyles, the lesser emphasis on material goals, all have contributed to a weakening of discipline as a motivational force. The biggest problem in our industrial society today, without qualification, is the underutilization of people in the workforce. It is, in itself, a monumental deterrent to maximum individual productivity. But far worse, it has a relationship with just about every aspect of the work situation: pay, discipline, direction, to cite the motivators we've already discussed, and also the full range of organizational goals, profit, production, morale, and so forth. The major effect of underutilization is turnover, and turnover, as any industrial leader will tell you, is the bane of his existence. The most talented young people, aware of the fact that they're not being fully utilized, quit. The young man has grown up without the problem or frustrations of his older boss who remembers the Depression. He's of a generation unique in sociological history, a generation without substantive problems of personal survival. Often the young men who stay are generally of a less aggressive nature, who eventually will extend the minimum of effort, which ultimately becomes fixed. If they're unable to channel their unused abilities elsewhere, they will, according to Parkinson's law, shrink to fit the job. And finally, diversion, getting people's minds off the unpleasant job, is fast becoming passé. So the 5 classic motivators that have been around since Moses, Julius Caesar, and Cleopatra are pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion. But in the rapidly changing world of today, they don't seem to work anymore. John Price tells us about 5 more, the stable motivators, which do. They are growth, achievement, responsibility, recognition, and work nature. First, growth. Growth is of 2 types, organizational growth and self-developmental growth. For the person to feel meaning in his job and thus give to that job the full measure of his ability requires that he sense the opportunity for promotion beyond his present job, organizational growth, and opportunity for the advancement of his own personal competence. He will, of course, sense opportunity only if there are, in fact, recognizable mechanisms for its realization. These mechanisms, quite simply, are discretionary awards, succession planning procedures, merit increase provisions, and personal development programs. 2. Achievement, according to some professionals in human behavior, is the most important of the needs for the organizational member. Unless the person senses that what he's doing is a contribution to a greater goal, that he is doing something that counts, he will very likely produce mediocrity. 3. A sense of responsibility is third of the 5 motivational needs which must be satisfied for maximum job performance. We do not, as a rule, delegate to people the freedom to act as responsible managers of their own jobs. Everybody is a manager if we think of management as involving the coordination of resources. So creating a feeling of importance and responsibility is the job of the manager today, and unless this feeling is created in the individual, one of the important elements will have been lost. 4. Recognition. The 5 most important words in the language are, I am proud of you. The 4 most important, what is your opinion? The 3 most important, if you please. And the 2 most important, thank you. These are all simple phrases, and they're pretty inexpensive ways to recognize individual performance with personal concern. 5, the last ingredient in the high-performance recipe, is work content, the nature of the job itself. Unless the person has a basic liking for the functions, the tasks, the mechanics of the work he performs, he cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, be motivated to perform at his highest achievement level. I don't mean to imply that the person who doesn't consider his work hobby-like is lost, motivationally speaking, but he must be in agreement with himself, if only subconsciously, on the fundamental desirability of what he's doing. No one can induce this last element. It must be there. We've always tended to look outside for the causes and solutions to the problems that confront us, rather than searching introspectively. You don't make an engine run better by polishing the block. Internal care is what counts. Now I'd like to quote something written by a business consultant friend of mine, Lawrence Harbeck, and published by the Wall Street Journal under the title, Some Plain Truth About Profit. I found it interesting not only for its valuable insights into the economics of free enterprise and the profit system, but also for the clarity with which they're presented, the almost total absence of professional jargon and technical gobbledygook. Free enterprise acknowledges human selfishness and directs it to constructive goals. Partisans of free enterprise claim this is a virtue. They believe selfishness is a fact of life. Opponents express horror at this pragmatic view. They believe government can eliminate human imperfection. Profit brings into sharpest focus the fight between free enterprise and socialism-communism. The battle lines seem to be clear, but they're not. Profit is a deceptive subject, and on no other topic are friends of free enterprise less convincing. Practical businessmen state forthrightly that profit makes the wheels go round. Opponents think they already know this too well, and the fact torments them. Academic proponents of free enterprise unintentionally encourage 2 negative inferences in their usual argument. They imply that profit exists only in a free enterprise system, and only there because of imperfections, and that the profit motive is synonymous with selfishness. For example, many textbooks say, profit is money left after cost is subtracted from selling price. This definition is narrowly accurate but broadly misleading. It sounds as if the seller is getting something for nothing. If the costs are met, why should there be a remainder? It implies by omission that profit is associated only with money and sales-oriented economic systems. Economic experts agree to disagree. They describe profits variously as high earnings from entrepreneurship, discrepancies arising from uncertainty, results of a monopoly position, return from a contrived scarcity, unnecessary surplus, implicit interest, rent, and wages, an accounting residual needed to balance earnings against the value of goods and services, and a mixture of these. None of this is helpful. As the profit concept is widely misunderstood, or understood diversely, and an emotional issue, it must be approached with precision. A simple economic model is needed to permit discussion in basic English and short words. Tradition is helpful. It calls for economic analysis to begin with Robinson Crusoe. Consider the lone castaway. He has drinking water, but no food. At rest, his body uses material and energy equivalent to 1 fish per day. If he does not eat 1 fish per day, while resting, he will starve. He must work to catch fish. Now he pays a price for each day's effort. The price is extra material and energy used by his body while fishing. His efforts, successful or not, require a 2nd fish each day. If he catches 2 fish each day, he will live. If his catch averages less than 2, he will die. If he catches a 3rd fish one day, it is profit. He can afford to rest the next day and not fish at all, or he can keep working and save his extra fish for the day when he gets less than 2. Or he can start to build a supply to allow him to stop fishing temporarily and make a net to improve his productivity. The extra fish, the profit, gives him the option of doing something other than fishing. Time is a factor in measuring profit. The preceding discussion defines it over a 24-hour day. We can also define it as occurring only during production, and conclude that the castaway makes a profit of one fish every 8-hour working day that he catches 2. It gives him the option of not fishing at night. The significant point is this. During a productive period, however defined, he produced more than he consumed. Profit is the difference between production and consumption of the producing unit while it is producing. Now, all living things and all organizations of living things must be profitable to exist. Bears, squirrels, and trees must make a profit in the summer to survive the winter and start producing again next spring. Life survives unprofitable periods only if production exceeded consumption during an earlier period. Profit achieved during 8 hours enables the worker to not work the remaining 16 hours of the day. The worker's profits permit his children to not work at all. Profit during good times, if not all removed, enables the business and the jobs it provides to continue during bad times. Profit is needed to start an enterprise. In new business, a bear cub and a plant seed owe their lives to profits generated before their birth. They could not come into existence or continue to exist at first, while still unprofitable, unless some other producer first generated a profit. Profit should not be confused with savings. Living things must save, if only in the form of fat, to survive profitless periods. But before they can save, they must profit. The real argument between free enterprise and socialism-communism is not about profit per se. All systems must profit to exist. The contentious issues are these. Who produces it? Who gets it? How is it used? And how are these decisions reached? Opinion on these questions should be developed and evaluated in the bright light of one glaring fact. No one gets it if there isn't any. Profit must precede allocation. It's pointless to give food stamps to poor people if farmers don't produce more food than farmers eat. Persons in government can't give a subsidy to an unprofitable activity unless they are first able to take a profit from some other enterprise. The total subsidy of some units of an economic system cannot exceed the profits of the others. Now, this hard fact applies equally to the castaway, families of bears, the United States, and all other nations, no matter what their economic and political structures. Nations living on the international dole are not exceptions. They're parts of larger economic systems. The finer things in life, sports, vacations, better homes, art, and so forth, and the so-called free things, welfare payments, low cost to the user government housing, foreign aid, and so forth, are possible only if profits occur first. It seems reasonable, therefore, that current profits should be distributed in a manner designed to encourage the continued and increasing availability of future profits. To achieve this objective, an economic system must take into account many things, including a few facts of human nature, such as, you cannot destroy incentive. You cannot stop the superior individual's efforts to excel his fellow men. With taxes, laws, and regulations, you may be able to destroy his incentive to make a profit, but this forces him to express his superiority through less productive actions. People expect to benefit directly and commensurately from their own productivity. Within the limits of their profitability, they provide for their families. Few are willing to give a large share of their profit to strangers. Oh, saints appear from time to time, but most of us do not qualify. Organizations based on the assumption that humans are saintly, or can be taught or legislated to be saintly, do not function as planned. They change or cease to exist. Often they become totalitarian in an effort to force people to be saintly. Precisely half the people are below average in ability. As a group, they produce much less than half of total profit. They are willing but unable. These underachievers must be given a greater share of profit than they produce, or in their frustration, they will diminish or destroy total profitability. They can do this by vote or direct action. They are not stupid. Given a chance to understand the choice, they will elect to dine on 25% of a turkey rather than 50% of a sparrow. Free enterprise comes closest to balancing these and other items, many of them conflicting, and is the most productive economic system. Idealists who confuse profits and selfishness often follow this pattern. They avoid profit-making jobs, seek profit-using careers, and clamor simultaneously for government action to prevent others from generating profits. The analogy would be to destroy part of the food and water in a lifeboat because the rowers are getting larger shares than those who cannot or will not help row the boat to safety. If someone wants to help the poor, he should start a new enterprise or work with an existing one to create more jobs and profits. The extra jobs and increased production will provide more help than will militant marching and loud-mouthed sympathy. If a person hopes to use profits as a government employee or a social worker, for example, he should be sure that his political actions do not discourage efficient producers from supplying the profits that permit him to appear altruistic. He should support the economic system that can best support him and those he wishes to help. Free enterprise is superior to socialism and communism in many ways, including profitability. It is not superior because it is profitable, however, but because it is more profitable. When John D. Rockefeller was in his 50s, making $1 million a week, he was told by his physician that unless he changed his living habits, he wouldn't be around much longer to enjoy his rapidly accumulating fortunes. The doctor gave Mr. Rockefeller 3 simple pieces of advice, and, as is often the case, in their simplicity was woven a profound wisdom. This is what Mr. Rockefeller was told. 1. Push yourself away from the table while you're still a little bit hungry. 2. Stop worrying. And 3. Get some regular physical exercise. And that was it. Now, I'd imagine if you went to your doctor to get a complete medical checkup using the latest diagnostic equipment, and if you were given the same advice as Mr. Rockefeller, you'd check off your doctor as a country quack and go out in search of some more sophisticated recommendations. Well, you needn't do that. For there were sophisticated recommendations in the 3-fold prescription given to John D. Rockefeller, and he recognized them. His doctor, in a sense, was a prophet. Strange as it may seem, the health of modern Western man is being destroyed by 3 things: overeating, excessive worrying, and a sedentary existence. In the next 2 issues of Direct Line, I'll be talking about the problems of obesity and anxiety as they relate to health. But for now, let's see if we can get some of the sitters out there off their seats and onto their feet. Let's explore together the possibilities available in our daily lives for increased physical activity. As nearly as I've been able to figure it, there are just 4 basic ways in which a person can find the physical activity his body needs to function at its best. If you can think of others, you might let me know, but for now, here are the 4. The first way is through our daily work. We can get regular physical activity through our work. But the problem is, who works for a living anymore? What I mean, of course, is who toils for a living anymore. Chances are you probably don't, for the opportunities for making a living through physical labor are rapidly disappearing. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean you don't work hard. You probably work very hard at your job. But what I'm asking is how much muscular strength or endurance does it take to accomplish your work successfully? What demand is put on your heart and lungs? What amount of caloric expenditure is required in your daily occupation? The answer for 9 out of 10 of us is simply that my work does not provide enough physical activity to meet the requirements for keeping my body dynamically healthy. Now, historically, this is a new development. For thousands of years, man had to toil for his livelihood. But even with the fitness rewards from physical labor being what they are, I'm sure we wouldn't care to go back to those conditions. Today, in order to offset the loss of physical activity that has beset man in this era, we need to find a suitable substitute for physical work. And that's where the other 3 ways come in. The second way to increase physical activity, and the most obvious, is through a planned exercise program. This can include joining a group at the YMCA, the Park and Recreation Department, or at your local community center. Or it could be a personal program of regular calisthenics, yoga, jogging, or any of a number of other activities pursued at your local health club or in and around your home. These are the activities most people think of when you mention the word exercise. But calisthenics, jogging, yoga, or isometrics should never, by themselves, be equated with the much broader term, exercise. As fine and helpful as these activities are, they also have an important drawback. They're boring. There's nothing very exciting about staring at your navel for 15 minutes or grunting your way through 25 sit-ups. Yes, they're boring, especially when you're working at them alone without the experience to interject variety. It's formal exercises like these that cause most of our exercise dropouts. As valuable as they can be to any person, and most people will tell you they never feel better than when they're working out, It still takes a special kind of person to be faithful to a program that turns out to be little more than tedious work. But exercise that is vigorous physical activity need not be tedious. This brings us to the third way to get increased physical activity into our lives. The most palatable form of exercise is through sports and recreation. Besides the pure fun of what you're doing, there are tremendous rewards that come from activities like swimming, backpacking, tennis, handball, cycling, badminton, square dancing, judo, skiing, volleyball, and other activities which are strenuous enough to condition you while you're enjoying the participation. Developing a high level of personal fitness requires forming exercise habits, and what habits are easier to develop than those that are fun? Investigate the opportunities available in your community. If you're not familiar with a certain sport and you feel you might enjoy it, there are probably instruction courses available somewhere. If not, there are usually people more than willing to teach you their favorite activity if you just show the interest. But sports, with all of their positive values, do take extra time and often require special facilities. The last of our ways of getting more exercise requires neither of these. This family of exercise opportunities is called built-ins. They can be the answer to a frantically busy person finding the time to do it. Anyone can put built-ins into many of his daily routine tasks. Sandwich them in regularly, and they become a habit, and they take no additional time. Let me give some examples. Try holding your stomach in whenever you're waiting for a red light, or while you're walking. How about riding an exercise bike while you're watching television? Why not use the time it takes to draw your bath water for doing sit-ups or push-ups? One of my exercise friends has a routine he follows each morning while he's getting ready for work. It includes half knee bends while he's brushing his teeth, rising on his toes while washing his face and lathering his beard, toe-touching and stretching while the wash basin is filling, and isometric exercises for his stomach, seat, and legs while shaving. By the way, he also performs isometrics while he's listening to his direct line tapes. Sounds strange? Well, it really isn't. It's simply using to the best advantage that most precious commodity of all, time. With a little imagination, you can find the same kinds of opportunities to add physical activity to your routine functions. You just have to think active. Now, any one of the 4 areas mentioned, your work, formal exercise, sports and recreation, and built-ins, could provide you with adequate activity to maintain a high state of physical fitness. But the most successful and lasting activity program will undoubtedly combine all 4. It takes some planning and commitment, but you can reach whatever level of activity and fitness you really desire. Remember, physical fitness is an unusual commodity. You can't buy it, borrow it, or steal it. And once you have it, you can't even store it. To possess it, you must make regular activity a daily habit and physical exertion a part of your life. John D. Rockefeller did. He took the advice of his physician in all 3 areas. He watched his diet, he sought a more positive approach to problem solving to eliminate worry, and he engaged in physical activity almost daily until he was 90 years of age. These 3 simple yet profound suggestions given to John D. Rockefeller by his physician turned his life from one of deteriorating health to one of dynamic living. And you know, that way of life is available to each of us. Now to close Direct Line 2, here's an idea if you've been wanting to get away from it all and have the time to get some good ideas. Take your family on a trip around the world. It was done not long ago by a 39-year-old telephone equipment maintenance man. Here was what seemed to be a very average man with a very average family working a very average paying job to make ends meet. But the man and his wife decided to take the whole family on a trip around the world, so they sold practically everything they owned, including their home. It produced $8,500, as I recall, $7,000 of which they used on the trip. They boarded a freighter, sailed to Hawaii, the Fiji Islands, and Australia. Then a 43-day trip by passenger liner around Australia to Ceylon, India, Arabia, the Suez Canal, that was before the Middle East problem, through the Mediterranean to southern France, Gibraltar, London, and so on. They got home with nothing but $1,500 and the will to start all over again from scratch. He had obtained a 6-month leave of absence from his company. They're delighted with what they did, and they may even do it again someday. Thank you. One of my favorite publications is a small weekly called simply Menace, which I highly recommend. In its issue of June 28, 1972, in its book review section, it recommended The Educated Imagination, a book of lectures given some years ago for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation by Northrop Frye, which I subsequently ordered and read and also recommend. Northrop Frye speaks of 3 uses of language. Now, the first has to do with simple awareness of the facts of life and is made up mostly of nouns and adjectives. This language provides an inventory of what's out there. Its concern is with what is. Then there's the practical language of what one must do to get along in the world, how to relate to the environment. And in its most developed form, this is the language of science. Finally, there's the language of what might be, the language of what we're able to imagine could be. Now, all forms of language use the power of imagination, but only the third includes the major works of the imagination. In its other uses, imagination is more of a practical tool, not the designing architect of the creative intelligence. Now, Frye's book is concerned with the importance of having an educated imagination. By an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Now, let me repeat that. By an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Matthew Arnold, Frye recalls, distinguished between the environment and what he termed culture. The environment is what is, call it the status quo, or from another viewpoint, the establishment. But culture is made up of the vision of men, the best that has been thought and said. An environment without a horizon of culture would soon be fatal to human beings. For while we have obvious need to know how to relate to what is, never to imagine going beyond it would dehumanize us. Of the day-to-day level of what is, Frye says, on this level we use words to say the right thing at the right time, to keep the social machinery running, faces saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact. It's not the noblest thing that words can do, but it's essential, and it creates and diffuses a social mythology, which is a structure of words developed by the imagination. For we find that to use words properly, even in this way, we have to use our imaginations, otherwise they become mechanical cliches and get further and further removed from any kind of reality. There's something in all of us, and I think this is important. There's something in all of us that wants to drift toward a mob, where we can all say the same thing without having to think about it, because everybody is all alike except people that we hate or persecute. Every time we use words, we're either fighting against this tendency or giving into it. Now, when we fight against it, we're taking the side of genuine and permanent civilization. The power of the imagination is the means by which resistance to this retrograde tendency is strengthened. If the imagination is not made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision, then its uses are degraded to unworthy, even if apparently spectacular purposes. As Frye puts it, the civilization we live in at present is a gigantic technological structure, a skyscraper almost high enough to reach the moon. It looks like a single worldwide effort, but it's really a deadlock of rivalries. It looks very impressive, except that it has no genuine human dignity. For all of its wonderful machinery, we know it's really a crazy ramshackle building, and at any time may crash around our ears. Now, what the myth tells us is that the Tower of Babel is a work of the human imagination, that its main elements are words, and that what will make it collapse is a confusion of tongues. All had originally one language, the myth says. That language is not English or Russian or Chinese or any common ancestor, if there was one. It's the language of human nature, the language that makes both Shakespeare and Pushkin authentic poets, that gives a social vision to both Lincoln and Gandhi. It never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure, and it speaks only in a voice too quiet for panic to hear. And then, all it has to tell us when we look over the edge of our leaning tower is that we're not getting any nearer heaven, and that it's time to return to earth. Let's pick out the main points of that tremendously important and original theme. First, there are 3 languages. The first has to do with simple awareness of the facts of life and is made up mostly of nouns and adjectives. This language provides an inventory of what is out there. Its concern is with what is. Then secondly, there's the language, the practical language of what one must do to get along in the world, how to relate to the environment. And in its most developed form, this is the language of science. It's the language of our work. And on this level, we use words to say the right thing at the right time, to keep the social machinery running, faces saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact. It's not the noblest thing that words can do, but it's essential. Hello there, good morning, how you feeling? Great, me too. Rotten weather, isn't it? Right. Well, there's something in us all that wants to drift toward a mob, where we can all say the same thing without having to think about it, because everybody is all alike, except people that we can hate or persecute, and every time we use words, we're either fighting against this tendency or giving into it. And when we fight against it, we're taking the side of genuine and permanent civilization. I have a saying framed in my office that reads, "Never, for the sake of peace and quiet, deny your own experience or convictions." It was written by Dag Hammarskjöld, late Secretary General of the United Nations. The easy thing is to go along with the gang, laugh at their jokes, and agree with their prejudices, just be a good old boy or girl, one of the gang. It's the easiest way on earth to never amount to much, and kid yourself into believing that at least you're doing as well as the other fellows. People who have never taken the hard road to self-discovery, lacking an identity of their own, find comfort in losing themselves within the larger identity of the group. This is the person who says, in effect, "I don't know who I am or where I'm going, but at least I'm a member of good old such-and-such organization. Yes, sir." As Manus puts it, the power of the imagination is the means by which resistance to this retrograde tendency is strengthened. If the imagination is not made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision, then its uses are degraded to unworthy, even its apparently spectacular purposes. For the third language is the language of what might be, the language of what we're able to imagine could be. It's the language of hope. It's the language with which we formulate worthy goals and ideals. It's the designing architect of the creative intelligence. It's the universal language which speaks to all of us during those moments when we reach unusual peaks of human aspiration and genius. As Fry puts it, that language is not English or Russian or Chinese or any common ancestor if there was one. It's the language of human nature, the language that makes both Shakespeare and Pushkin authentic poets, that gives a social vision to both Lincoln and Gandhi. It never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure, and it speaks only in a voice too quiet for panic to hear. And then, all it has to tell us, when we look over the edge of our leaning tower, is that we're not getting any nearer heaven, and that it's time to return to earth. Time to return to earth. Now, I'll buy that, and I think you will too. It's time to tear away the phony tinsel and chrome and junk and cheap plastic from our lives and find the big, moving, pulsing life that has been so sicklied o'er, hidden away in the hold while most of so-called civilized humanity has been on a silly pleasure cruise to nowhere. Yes, I think it's time we return to Earth. As far as the man-created problems, the same technology that created them can overcome and do away with them, when it's finally coordinated on a worldwide basis. It should start in America because Americans are the world's champion polluters. And it has started here with remarkable results. Do you know I found more eye-burning and irritating smog in the city of Johannesburg, South Africa, than I've ever experienced in Los Angeles. And it's the same in Tokyo, London, Paris, and Rome. The west coast of Italy is a cesspool, and no more birds can be found near the harbor at Genoa. And they've been living on that coast for thousands of years. We're the world champion polluters of the air and water because of our highly developed and sophisticated technology. But I have no doubt whatever that the same technology will make the North American continent the cleanest on Earth within 50 years. We are returning to Earth. We're realizing that just as the mind and body are inseparable and interacting agencies, so are the Earth and man. And the industries that clean up America can also clean up the world and give us new and serendipitous industries as great as any we have known in the past. It could help the balance of payments. But now, how about you and me and our families? Can we listen to that third language, the language that never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure, the voice that speaks too softly for panic to hear, and when we listen to it, all it has to tell us when we look over the edge of our leaning tower is that we're not getting any nearer heaven and that it's time to return to earth. I'm certain that Mr. Fry uses the word heaven here in its metaphorical sense, that we're not getting any nearer to the kind of world a creature with the brains and ingenuity of man should be able to create for himself. Someone said, man can swim faster and deeper than the fish, he can fly faster and higher than the birds, he can tunnel deeper and with more efficiency into the earth than can any burrowing creature. The only thing he hasn't learned how to do is walk on the earth like a man. But by an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Now, this tells us that with practice, the reach of our imagination, the reach of our minds, can be extended beyond all ordinary limits. It's true. And as we've said before, imagination is everything. So let's return to Earth through the exercise of an expanded imagination. What's important to you? What, and forget all about language number 2 here, the language that says the so-called right thing at the right time. Face is saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact. What's the most important thing in the world to you, really? Not what the community expects from you or your neighbors or your family, but what's important to you. What has that quiet voice been saying to you when you've taken the time and leisure to listen to it? Hasn't it been something that you know down deep in the very fibers of your being is true for you? Then remember what Thoreau said. You have only to move in the direction of your dreams to meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Emerson told us to trust that voice within, to trust our own intelligence and that small, still voice that tries so hard to get us on the right track, and which we so often fight to maintain the status quo, the dreary lives of what Thoreau called quiet desperation. The chances are that what the voice is trying to tell you to do is also best for everyone concerned, the community, your family, everyone in the long run. So then, through the systematic exercise of our imaginations, let's return to Earth, our Earth, that place that is right for us, and that will bring us the joy and fulfillment we seek. Think. Relax. Become as serene as you can and listen to the voice that never speaks unless we listen in leisure. Gradually, through a little daily exercise with practice, the reach of our minds can be extended beyond all ordinary limits. We'll be able to see through the obvious to the truth beyond, the truth for us. Now let's go back to something I said earlier. For while we have an obvious need to know how to relate to what is, never to imagine going beyond it would dehumanize us. Now, in my opinion, only an infinitesimal fraction of humanity uses the most amazing and perhaps least understood human faculty, the one which enables us to bring about, through the educated use of the imagination, a new and better life, the achievement of new, interesting, exciting goals. And it's when we learn to use this faculty, this seeming miracle of creation, that we become fully alive, fully human. Now, it's here that the imagination is made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision. When we throw an electrical switch, we expect things to happen, the lights to go on or off, the motor surges to humming life. We take electricity for granted. It's there, it works. The fact that no one knows what electricity is doesn't bother anyone any more than the fact that our heart will pump in response to an electrical synapse 103,680 times a day, some 38 million times a year for 80 years or so. It's all a complete and total mystery. There's not a single human being alive who understands one blessed thing about it. Sometime in the middle of the 4th month of gestation, a quiet little heart begins suddenly to beat. No one knows how or why. It is a total mystery, period. That there is a connection between all living substances has been demonstrated. A polygraph expert, one who's skilled in the use of the so-called lie detector, has demonstrated that houseplants know when you decide to come home from a shopping trip and react in their own emotional way to that fact. When you dump live brine shrimp into boiling water, they seem to faint before they hit the water that will kill them. And at the same instant, the plants throughout the house react violently to the murder being committed in the kitchen. Now, all of this is a rather circuitous way of saying that there's much that we do not understand. That's an understatement that may well win first prize for the century. What we do know, compared to what we do not know, was cleverly demonstrated by the distinguished inventor and scientist Charles Kettering before an audience of engineers one time. He had a stage backdrop made, which consisted of a great shining sheet of stainless steel, perhaps 30 by 50 feet in size. He took a metal stylus, and going to a corner of the sheet, he made a tiny, almost invisible mark. He then told his audience that the mark he had just made was meant to represent all that science had accomplished to the present time, while the great, pristine, untouched expanse of the sheet of stainless steel was intended to represent what was yet to be discovered. He probably overestimated what we've accomplished. Let's open our minds to the undeniable fact that man is just taking his first shaky, tentative steps into knowledge. You don't need to know what electricity is to read your evening paper or be able to see your way after dark. You don't need to know what keeps your heart beating without your having to think about it for 80-some years, give or take a few. And now I want you to understand that there is a mysterious stuff in which we live, as ubiquitous as the air itself, that responds to the way we habitually think. Now, I don't know what it is. I don't think anybody knows what it is. But it's there, and it works. It's a magic kind of stuff that creates out of itself that which we demand, whether we know we're demanding it or not. It's also the opponent of which Huxley spoke when he compared life to a game of chess. You know, he said, our opponent is always fair and just, and would rather we win than lose, but who cannot overlook the smallest mistake or ignorance. He said those who play well are paid with that sort of overflowing generosity with which the strong delight in strength. But those who play ill are checkmated, without haste, but without remorse. A man named Clifford Eccles had dreamed for years of going into business for himself. All his life he'd worked as a clerk in a grocery store for a small salary. One day he ran across a quotation by Emerson that got him off dead center. The quotation was, "Do the thing, and you will have the power. But they that do not the thing have not the power." Well, he mortgaged everything he had, arranged for some credit from the necessary suppliers, and a few years later was doing $1 million a year in business. He said later, "As I started to do the things I'd been thinking and dreaming about, I began to discover that I had hidden talents and abilities I'd never suspected. Ideas came to me that I was able to turn into more successful business. In short, when I had enough faith to start to do the thing, I did find that I had the power. I'd had it all along and hadn't realized it." Well, there's an important lesson there. It's only when we actually begin something that we find we have the power and the talent to carry it off. As long as we sit and think about it, wish for it, and stay where we are, nothing happens. Even Michelangelo said if people only knew how hard I worked to gain mastery, it wouldn't seem wonderful at all. And perhaps the distinguished Somerset Maugham put it best when he wrote, "It's a funny thing about life. If you refuse to accept anything but the best, you very often get it." We get out of life about what we expect from it, and the endless diversity of expectations is what makes life and its possibilities so interesting. Most people never learn how to play this game of life. Few learn how to play it the way we probably could. If we were really aware of our own powers, we'd live in a continuous state of awe. But most people, those in the big crowd, play the game of life for peanuts when they could be enjoying a banquet. It's too bad, but that's the way it is. The people who never learn how to win at this game of life are those logical, practical, pragmatic people who never jump unless they've got a clear picture of where they're going to land. Play it safe is their motto, and by playing it safe, as they call it, they miss the banquet. Willard F. Rockwell, Jr., the dynamic and brilliant chairman of the board and chief executive officer of the North American Rockwell Corporation, in his excellent book, The 12 Hats of a Company President, What It Takes to Run a Company, published by Prentice Hall, says, "The best soothsayer in the world is still guessing. Face it, and train yourself to guess. After you collect all the facts, analyze them rationally, but don't be afraid to add the slightly mysterious ingredient of intuition. Pull up the hood on your toga. When something tells you that an event is going to work out in a certain way, try to figure out what it is that makes you feel that way. Let your intuition take over at times. It may be highly creative whether you entirely understand the process or not. Know in a life where death is inevitable, don't ever play it safe. Play it well. Play it intelligently if you can. Play it courageously and play it for all it's worth, but don't play it safe. We've all got security locked in. It's just down the road. We'll be safe and secure beyond problems and pain forever before too long. To win at chess or golf or tennis or life, you have to make moves. You have to go on the offensive. You have to take chances. There's no way on earth to figure the result of every move in advance, and you're not going to win them all. There's just no way. You've got to lose a little, too. It's the people who won't take the chance of losing who rule out the chance of winning. Sometimes it seems as though the majority of people think it's some kind of a sin to be wrong or to admit that you've been wrong about something or make a mistake. The mature person laughs, admits he was wrong, that he made a bad move or a damn fool mistake, and goes right ahead trying to do better the next time. And if he's wise, he knows about this mysterious stuff, or thinks he knows about it, that over the long haul will give him what he's made up his mind to get. And he knows that sometimes this stuff moves in strange and mysterious ways. He's going to get a hunch to move this way or that way occasionally without knowing why. Call it intuition, a hunch, whatever. And if he's wise, he'll move. He does his best to collect what answers he can in front, but he knows he can't get them all. Life just doesn't reveal the back of the book. We must take our stand and then wait to be rewarded or knocked flat, whichever the case may be. For those who strive for the top, it's important to remember that it can be reached just as satisfactorily within a large organization as it can in a business of one's own, often even more so. The chances of a person building anything approaching the size of some of our larger corporations during his own lifetime or pulling down the kind of income he can earn in a large organization are not always very good. It's unlikely that Mr. Wilson could have built another General Motors on his own during his own working lifetime. nor is it likely that he would have amassed the millions or earned $600,000 a year as an entrepreneur. He did it all as an employee of a large company. Moreover, with the resources that a large company can command, projects can be embarked upon and satisfactions derived that would be difficult or impossible in a smaller organization. In a study to find out what makes those who get to the top so valuable, the Harvard Business School concluded that those who lead are not just problem solvers, they're problem finders. And if you think about the people who have scored big in the business world over the past century, you recognize them as problem finders or identifiers. We tend to take problems for granted and put up with them as part of the world we have to live with. The problem identifier is one who's conscious of problems and isolates them and casts about for a solution, who trains the reach of his imagination. I saw a signboard recently advertising a Suzuki motorcycle. The caption read, "It solves the boredom problem," or words to that effect. Now, boredom is a problem with young people today. Here was an advertising agency identifying the problem and offering a solution. We hear people say, young people are bored today. The problem identifier sees that condition not only as a social problem, but also as a business opportunity. In a study made many years ago by Notre Dame, if my memory serves me correctly, it was discovered that while executives were usually worth their higher salaries, in that they had the ability to solve problems and emerge victorious from crises when they arose, they seldom or never thought creatively between crises. They were reactors to problems, and were typical of people in management generally. They would not run from or turn away from crises or problems. They'd tear right into them with brains and confidence, and like the airline pilot who in 30 seconds will earn his salary for a year by overcoming with skill and courage a hairy problem that suddenly arises, but perhaps much of the rest of the time is content to just sit back and drive. They represent the backbone of the industries they represent, and we'd be out of business without them. But they seldom form the habit of isolating problems that need solving before they develop. Frequently, our worst enemies when it comes to doing some of the things we might find a great deal of growth and fun doing are our friends, relatives, even our parents. We seem to know intuitively that there's a big opportunity-filled world out there, but parents and relatives, in their desire to protect us from harm, think they're doing us a favor when they tell us to chicken out and take the safer middle road. You have a fertile field for neuroses when a young person knows the world is full of adventure and his parents keep after him to become a CPA. May the powers that be save us from well-meaning friends, relatives, and parents. They have no more reason to prescribe a lifetime career for us than we would have prescribing a career for them. And it often seems that those who have themselves missed the boat and find themselves living small and dreary lives are the quickest to suggest a route for us. Or what is just as bad, blowing our good ideas out of the box when we're naive enough to try them out on them. Emerson wrote something to the effect that no one ever falls ill, but that passers-by do not idly hope that he will die. And something similar could be written about seeking advice from people little qualified to give it. I have a small wooden box on my desk where visitors can see it, and on the top is the word advice. And when you go to open it, you find that it's simply a solid block of wood. It cannot be opened. There's no advice. Not today, or any day. There is one exception in the advice department, and that's a book you should read by L. Rust Hills, which is interestingly entitled, How to Do Things Right. To quote from the author's introductory note, you'll find all the answers here, no matter what the question that's bothering you, whether it be how to save your marriage, what to do about America's industrial growth, how you can be absolutely certain your alarm will go off in the morning, or how to counteract the chaos and immorality of modern life. The book is wonderfully funny, but there's also much meat in it. Let me quote briefly from pages 25 and 26 on the importance of order in our lives. What I mean by order, he writes, when I'm being serious, is not neatness and tidiness and cleanliness, not the every chair in place, polished ashtrays, never an open book left lying in the so-called but misnamed living rooms of upper-middle-class suburbs of medium-sized Midwestern cities. There's no beauty there, nor life either. Everyone's down in the cellar in the pseudo-pine-paneled, also misnamed playroom watching TV. What I do mean by order is not taking on more than you can manage without still being able to do what you really want. What order is not purchasing a lot more stuff than you can fairly easily pay for. Not because debts are bad as such, but because they end up worrying you, and because you don't really need the stuff anyway, and you have to maintain it and lug it around with you and get it fixed when it breaks. Order is the opposite of complicating. It's simplifying. Order is not getting deeply entangled with another woman so you don't get her problems on top of your own. Order is like not wasting a lot of time trying to find things. Order's avoiding a lot of recriminations because you didn't do something you said you would, and maybe it's not saying you'll do a lot of things to begin with. Order is scrupulousness and meticulousness in arrangements with others, so neither of you is disappointed. It's doing things right or fairly right. It's establishing, so far as possible, a sensible, regular, regulated, ongoing household, so the family can come and go in freedom, knowing there's definitely a place to come back to and what it'll be like when they get there, get home. Order is not having to worry too much that you've forgotten something again. Basically, what order is not getting in over your head. Order is definitely not things like regimentation and repression. Order is freedom, or at least freeing. One last time. Order is not an aspect of compulsion, but of tranquility. The tranquility that permits you to do what you really want. The trouble is that disorder in our lives accumulates so gradually that by the time it bugs us, it seems too late to do anything about it, and we're not sure we want to anyway. This is especially so in our married lives, but it's true of other aspects too, our business and general busyness. The growing complexity seems a natural part of growing older and assuming responsibility. Children, promotions, possessions are in fact all very much wanted when they arrive. A lot of the things we own, the extra car, the summer house, the children's TV, are acquired in the delusion that they will make things better, and especially ironic, easier. They ultimately do not, of course, because most of these conveniences, so-called, do not simplify, but further complicate. Disappointment leads to dissatisfaction, which leads to disillusionment, which leads to something quite like desperation and despair, and it all gets to be too much. One is in over one's head and simply must get out. I suggest you add How to Do Things Right to your library. You'll enjoy the book immensely. It'll have you and your spouse laughing together, but it also makes a lot of sense. The author, L. Russ Tales, makes the extremely perspicacious point that people get divorced for, of all things, companionship. And he's right. The person wants a divorce, he or she says, because he or she wants to simplify his or her life. One of the curious things about the English language is that there's no word for both male and female, and once you get into that he or she business, things can get ridiculous. If you just say he, as we were taught to do when we wanted to include both sexes, the women's lib people jump all over you. And speaking of divorce, in a recent radio program, I quoted the following statistics. For every 1,000 new marriages in the United States during a recent 4-month period, there were 455 divorces. In Montana, there were 803 divorces per 1,000 new marriages. In Oregon, 768. In California, the most populous state, there were more than 3 divorces granted for every 4 new marriages. More than 3 out of 4. And according to an article by James H. Bowman, religion writer for the Chicago Daily News, in which he quotes William Grendyke, director of casework for the Catholic Family Consultation Service, people threaten divorce sometimes to get a response. Practically everyone who comes in here, says Grendyke, says he or she cannot communicate. The ultimate in demanding communication, he says, is to say divorce. That will usually get attention and produce some kind of response. The main reason for the epidemic proportions of divorce in this country seem to be lack of communications. Another big factor in the zooming divorce statistics is the fact that people aren't tolerating bad marriages anymore, the fact that the marriages are bad being usually their own fault notwithstanding. Many younger couples are not willing to put up with what they consider to be a bad or even mediocre marriage. The facts seem to indicate that they become bored with one another. Communications break down because both of them have said all they know to say, they've depleted their respective memory banks, and then sit in silence, reading or watching the tube. Unlike the Canada goose, humans do not tend to mate for life, at least not anymore. Another cause of divorce is rising affluence. Money is a tremendous contributor to divorce. Speaking of divorce, I agree with Mr. Hills, who in his book writes, I've nothing against divorce, God knows. It's the unhappiness that causes the divorce that I find hateful. And he suggests that what causes this unhappiness is the inability to cope, the impossibility of keeping on top of all the things that keep popping up, the sad inadequacy of our efforts to keep together in our lives and to keep our lives together. And what causes this inability to cope, this disorder, is the complexity of the way we attempt to live. Another good reason for the theme of this issue of Direct Line, which is to return to Earth to further simplify our lives,